Hello, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Bonjour. We are going to be talking about the Louvre in Paris and their amazing art collection of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia art in particular. So let's go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for being here. So if you're watching us live, we always encourage people to introduce themselves. So in the Zoom chat, you can let us know your first name, where you're connecting from, and what's your favorite art museum is our icebreaker question for today. It's always fascinating to find out where people are joining us from and to learn more about them. So welcome. My name is Robert. I'll be your host. A little bit about myself. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. I was an art history major at the University of Michigan. I spent the first 2 years of my career working at the Detroit Institute of Arts before transitioning off into the business world. And 9.5 years ago, I founded the nonprofit organization Washington, D.C. History and Culture with some friends. And I'm currently still involved in that. And then I do in-person tours and programs and things like that here in Texas, mostly in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Austin. And my favorite art museum is a sentimental favorite. It's my first professional employer, the Detroit Institute of Arts. So that's a little bit about myself. We also have our good friend Patty joining us. Patty, the pride of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Hi, Patty. How are you today? Happy Saturday.
I'm fine. I have to ask, did you schedule this knowing that Notre Dame was going to be rededicated today?
Well, yes, of course, because I was in communication with them. And no, I'm just kidding. It was a coincidence.
Yeah, a nice coincidence, actually. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so
A
I'm
double
here.
dose of French culture.
I'm sorry?
A double dose of French culture.
Absolutely, yes. So, yes, I'm here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We were named by one of those home and garden type magazines. I can't remember exactly which one of the top 30 Christmas destination cities in the country.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's cool. Wow. Well, that's good.
yeah,
All
this
right.
is just recently I found out that.
Oh, I see. Okay. So everyone's got a couple weeks to go visit Patty and her Christmas friends in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And
Well,
Patty, do you have a favorite
oh,
art museum? Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. What was that?
again, this crosses the divide between art and culture because one of the activities that brought that designation is our home museum, the area that's designated, and a lot of homes from different areas were gradually moved to this area. And this weekend they do a candlelight tour of all these different homes. So, and actually, some of them people actually live in,
Oh, yeah.
believe it
Oh,
or
that's
not.
cool.
Yeah, they are. Some of them are rented, but yeah. So that's really beautiful. That's going on right now. So among other things, so it kind of crosses the divide between history and culture and museum, all the things together, because
Oh,
obviously
yeah.
there's a lot of cultural artifacts and period decor and that sort of thing that goes on.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, definitely. When we met in person last weekend, and we were talking about our favorite art museums, and I answered all. So they're all good.
Yes, well, if you have museums in your blood, you have museums in your blood. There's
Oh,
just
yeah,
no,
yeah.
like, it's like if you go someplace, your nose immediately points to whatever the best museums are.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, definitely. All right. Well, thanks, Patty. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate that. And we also have our good friend Brad joining us from Falling Waters, West Virginia. Hi, Brad. How are you? And do you have a favorite art museum?
I sure do. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to France, I guess. And I'm hoping that we get to see the dedication of Notre Dame at some point on YouTube. But it's an amazing accomplishment. I watched a short documentary last week where they went through what they had to do, and it's incredible. But my favorite museum would have to be the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia.
All right. They have a fabulous collection there. We'll have to do a program on them someday in the
Well,
near future.
it was called Leningrad when I was there, but
Okay. Well, things change. All right. Well, thanks, Brad. Thanks, Patty. Thanks so much for joining us. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. And I have to give a shout out to our good friends at PEM, which is the Paris Events Meetup. If you're ever visiting Paris or if you live there now, you should Google Paris Events Meetup because they have all these really cool events and you can go tour the city and go check out other parts of Paris with like-minded individuals. So thanks to all of our friends at the Paris Events Meetup. We do a lot of collaboration and partnerships with them and our good friend Christopher. So thank you very much. Welcome. Bonjour. All right, so we're going to be going off to Paris today, at least virtually, of course. Of course, one of the world's great cities and one of the top tourist attractions in Paris, of course, is the Louvre. And so we'll be talking about the Louvre today. Now, the Louvre is interesting for many reasons, one of them being it's really the birth of kind of Egyptology being embraced in the non-Egyptian world, so to speak. And the Louvre has this really spectacular Egyptian art collection. It's one of the top Egyptian art collections anywhere in the world. At the Louvre, you might be wondering, like, well, why is that? What happened? Because Cairo in Egypt is actually quite a ways away from Paris, France. In fact, it's 2,000 miles or 3,200 kilometers. So quite a distance. So why is that it has such a strong Egyptian art collection? And of course, we're also going to be talking about ancient Mesopotamia as well. And one of the big reasons is because Napoleon was in Egypt. You've probably heard of him. So Napoleon had this military campaign in Egypt from 1798 to 1801, and he ends up bringing a lot of stuff from Egypt back to Paris. And so a lot of people really consider this the birth of Egyptology. Of course, local Egyptians had been studying their history and culture for centuries, but this is really the first time it's kind of widely embraced and appreciated and all that kind of thing outside of the Middle East, and that takes place in France. And so again, Napoleon, he's in Egypt from 1798 to 1801. Very fascinating campaign for, that has a big influence on not only Egyptian history and French history, but also Egyptian art history. Here's a depiction of the campaign. You can see the pyramids in the background. And you can see Napoleon at the Great Sphinx. So again, what happens is Napoleon packs up a lot of these Egyptian artifacts and has them shipped back to France, where they go on display at the Louvre. So you can see here's a Sphinx. Here's some Parisians that are coming to check it out. Now, imagine how amazing this would be to see today, which it is. But I would think maybe even more so back then, because this is an era, of course, before the internet, before television, before photography, et cetera, et cetera. And so imagine seeing something all the way from Egypt back at that point in time when you really only would have been able to read about it or see prints or paintings or thing like that. So to actually see something so ancient and so fascinating up close in person, it really, of course, captivated the Parisians. And then so that way, that's kind of where the Louvre got into the Egyptology business, so to speak. One thing that I find really super fascinating about ancient Egypt is how long their empire was. And I know most people have heard of ancient Egypt and they know it was important and they've heard of King Tut and Cleopatra and the pyramids and stuff like that. But yeah, look at how long this empire was in kind of its prominent stage. So it's really hard to get like an exact starting point and ending point. But usually when people, historians, talk about ancient Egypt, they're talking about the time frame from 3150 BC, or over 3,000 years before Christ, to 641 AD. So wow, almost 4,000 years, which is really incredible. Our program today, when we look at the art at the Louvre, we're going to be talking about artworks that were done between 2600 BC and 30 BC, just to give you that context. Hold on for just one moment while I check something on my computer. Bear with me for one moment. Okay, so anyway, like I said, I don't think everyone can kind of fully appreciate the length of this empire and how long it lasted, et cetera, et cetera. So really interesting from that regard. And then I thought what I would do, in addition to the art objects, we're going to be looking at the Louvre, I thought I would include some other well-known works of art or architecture that you might be familiar with, and then we'll go through these in a chronological order. And I really wanted you to kind of see how all this stuff fits together. So, of course, they don't have the pyramids at the Louvre, but I wanted you to know like where this fits in, kind of culturally, historically, time-wise, et cetera, et cetera. So most people are familiar with the Great Pyramids of Egypt, and those date from 26th century BC, or 4,600 years ago. And so this is kind of like our kicking off point, or our starting point. So the Great Pyramids of Egypt. And then, interestingly enough, at the Louvre, one of their most famous artworks is their pyramid. It's a glass pyramid. And when it first was installed, it was extremely controversial. A lot of people did not like it. But since that time, it's really been embraced by all who visit the museum. I shouldn't say all. No one, I don't think anything's embraced by all. We'll say embraced by most. And the designer of the Louvre pyramid is, of course, I.M. Pei, famous architect, and it was installed in 1988. And yeah, it was really controversial. People didn't think it fit in at all with the Louvre. But if you know the importance that the Louvre played in Egyptology and kind of the embracing and promoting of Egyptian history and culture and art, it kind of makes sense in that regard. And then Pei was really interested in the triangle form. And of course, a pyramid is a series of triangles. And so there you can see it. This, of course, is the main building of the Louvre. Here is his glass pyramid. And then here's another view. So interesting that he's incorporated an ancient Egypt symbol in his artwork at the Louvre. All right, let's talk about ancient Egypt. And this is our first artwork. We were talking about the Sphinx earlier, and this is the Sphinx that's at the Louvre. It's called the Great Sphinx of Tanis. And they don't know the exact date it was made, but they determined it was around 26th century BC. So quite a long time ago, of course. All right, let's talk about this work. This is the museum caption that's next to the artwork. An enigmatic, half human, half animal creature with the body of a lion and the face of a king stands guard at the entrance to the Louvre's Department of Egyptian Antiquities. Deep down in the crypt, the Great Sphinx of Tanis welcomes visitors to a vast display of over 6,000 works spanning almost 5,000 years of Egyptian history. So pretty amazing. There's a lot of art museums throughout the world that are excellent, and those museums don't have 6,000 artworks combined all together. And the Louvre has 6,000 works just in the ancient Egypt time frame. So shows you the significance of their collection there. And they unfortunately don't know who the artists or artists were who made this object. It's one of the largest sphinxes that is outside of Egypt. And just to kind of give you the context, the Great Sphinx that's in Egypt now that people are familiar with, that's 62 feet or 20 kilometers by 240 feet or 70 kilometers long. So 62 feet high, 240 feet long. The Tanis Sphinx is pretty large, but of course not quite that big. It's 6 feet high or 1.8 meters and 16 feet or 4.8 meters long. And if you're wondering what it's made out of, granite. And they don't have to worry about anybody stealing it because it weighs 53,000 pounds, give or take a few pounds. So imagine, yeah, hoisting this on a ship back in the early 1800s and transporting it from Egypt to Paris, and all the logistics work that would have been involved in that. Pretty incredible.
Robert, those kilometers ought to go out of there and just make them meters.
Oh, okay. No problem. Thanks. I can take care of that. Let's see.
Quite a bit longer.
Let's see. All right. Oh, and then just to give you kind of a context of when things fit in from like a time standpoint. So we talked about the Great Pyramids, of course, and then the Great Sphinx. And then this is the Sphinx of Tanis, just to give you kind of some context of other people or things that you might have been familiar with. So Nefertiti, she's one of the most famous Egyptians in history. She lived in between 1370 and 1330 BC. King Tut in the 1300s BC. Ramses also from the 1300s into the 1200s. And then, of course, Cleopatra. Talk about her and other folks a little bit later. So again, just to give you that context of how this kind of fits in. So this is long before Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Ramses, Cleopatra, etc. And then here's the side view from the front. And then here is the Great Sphinx in Egypt, which came about 100 years later. And then here they are side by side. And so you can see a lot of similarities between the two. The dimensions, of course, are very, very different, but the overall kind of design of it is very, very similar in that regard. So you can see the kind of comparison and contrast, so to speak, between those two. And then here's the front view. Now, this has suffered some damage over the years, not since it's been in France, but before that, because it had been buried, gone through a lot of things going on in the time frame it was in Egypt, et cetera, et cetera. So it has a little bit of damage, but pretty good shape overall, considering the circumstances. And then here's the front view of the Louvre Sphinx with the more famous Great Sphinx in Egypt. And again, you can see a lot of similarities between the two. All right, so what exactly is a Sphinx? Well, let's talk about that. So it's a mythical creature, and it has a human's head and a lion's body. And what was it for? Like, why did they make this? Well, they really wanted to have different entities, so to speak, protecting the tomb, because the tomb is where they're um, keeping the royals after they would pass away. And so they wanted different figures, so to speak, that would protect them from any evil that they might encounter in their afterlife. And so that's what happens here. The Great Sphinx of Tanis was discovered in 1825. It was brought to the Louvre in 1827. Again, this is really kind of the beginning of Egyptology, not in Egypt itself, but outside of the Middle East, say. People just really fascinated by this ever since then, in the preceding, say, 200 years. And hey, look at that. Next year is going to be actually the 200th anniversary of this being discovered. And again, imagine a Parisian of the day, or anyone for that matter, seeing this in an era before photography and before movies and before the internet, when really at that point in time you only could have read about ancient Egypt or maybe seen prints or paintings or something like that. And then you don't see the back view very often, because when you visit the museum, unfortunately, you're not able to travel around it in a 360-degree basis. So there's a photo of the back. I actually snuck back behind it when no one was looking and took this picture with my cell phone. No, I'm just kidding. I got the picture from the museum. Don't do that. You'll get in trouble. You'll get arrested by the Paris police and thrown in jail. You don't want that to happen, really ruin your trip. And then a close up of the front view. And then here they are working on it when they brought it back from Paris or from Egypt, because what's happened is over the course of time, they've had to work on it and try and preserve it at various points in times, including this particular instance. And then again, kind of the birth of Egyptology in Europe, which of course subsequently leads to that being embraced in other parts of the world. All right, let's continue on with some different artworks. Most of the things that we're going to be looking at today, they unfortunately have no idea who made them, because it was a different era, a different period. Artists weren't as widely, say, recognized as they are today. So many of these artworks, unfortunately, we don't actually know who made them specifically, or we don't know much about the artist histories per se. So here's what's called a stele. This is from 2590 BC to 2533. Not sure the exact year it was made, but this is a stone slab. And so what you have here is, this is a princess, And look at her clothing. She's wearing a panther skin dress, which I'm guessing maybe most of you have not worn a panther skin dress before. Um, and what she's doing here is she's sitting with food items that are going to be needed for the afterlife. And so, really cool. Look at the great colors on this when you consider how old it is. So, pretty amazing in that regard. Oh, and then just as always, of course, Brad, Patty, if you have anything to questions, comments, or commentary, etc., feel free to chime in whenever you feel the urge to do so. But yeah, kind of unusual. You don't really see people in artwork wearing panther skin dresses, at least not real panther skin, maybe the print, but not so much the real thing. And then here is the full view. And again, really great details on this. Look at the colors. Um, they've, of course, been restored and preserved over the years since they've been in the collection, but really amazing detail and great color on this, especially when you consider the fact of how old this is. And then here's a close up. Kind of an interesting dress in the fact that her right arm is exposed, and then the left arm and the rest of her body is in this print dress.
The posture with the arm across the chest, I wonder if that is significant at all, because it's an
Yeah,
unusual.
yeah, good question. That doesn't seem like your average seated position if you're going to be hanging out and eating dinner or lunch or breakfast.
Yeah, I wonder if it indicates anything that would have been applicable to the culture then.
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that, but very observant, Patty, as always. Thank you very much. All right, let's continue on. This is one of my favorite works in their collection. And again, we don't know who the artist is. This is the Seated Scribe, and it's from approximately 2300 BC. And I love this piece because it's so realistic, which is really amazing when you consider how old it is, 4,300 years old. And again, just to give you that context of when this was made, so we already talked about the Great Sphinx of Tanis. Now we're talking about the Seated Scribe. So this is, 200 years after the Great Sphinx of Giza, and 300 years after the Great Pyramids, but long before Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Ramses, Cleopatra, etc., etc. And all right, so what's the story with this? What is this made out of? Well, it's limestone, and it's actually really large, given the nature of it. It's 21 inches or 54 centimeters high. It was discovered in 1850. And the reason why the scribes are important, we'll talk about their role in Egyptian, say, society. Most Egyptians were farmers. That's what the great number of masses did. They were involved in farming and agricultural endeavors. There was only a few people that could read and write, and many of those people were in the profession known as scribes. And so, what those individuals did, the scribes, is they handled all the writing, record keeping, administrative stuff, and things like that. And they play a really important role in history because that's one reason why we know a lot about Egyptian history and culture because these scribes were writing things down. A lot of their writings were preserved or kept, and then they could be studied later on to find out more about the people and their culture and their history and things like that. And because there was only a limited number of people that could read and write and perform these roles as scribes, they were really highly regarded. They was a very prestigious position. It was well paid. Almost not the exact same thing, but it kind of be like now. Like sometimes people they want their kids to become a doctor or an attorney or something like that. And so yeah, these were really prestigious positions. And were needed in the afterlife because as the royals would kind of continue on to the afterlife, of course, they're going to need someone to handle their administrative matters. So the scribes would be going with them in the journey. All right, a scribe's job was to record things in hieroglyphic writing on different documents, especially papyrus, which is a type of paper. Because scribes knew how to read and write, their job was very important and people had great respect for them. Preparing papyrus scrolls required skill. Reed pens and black ink made from charcoal were used. Once his work was done, the scribe affixed his seal to the document. Now, if you go visit museums throughout the world, you'll frequently see these scribe figures. So, as I mentioned earlier, I used to work at the Detroit Institute of Arts. One of their most famous items in their Egyptian collection is also a Seated Scribe. It's a much smaller one, but it's kind of from around the same time frame. So, as you visit the art museums near your home or in your travels, you'll probably come across these scribe figures. You should see them frequently in Egyptian art. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of Egyptians were not scribes. They were involved in agricultural endeavors as farmers. And so that's another interesting, unique thing about this particular object. It's depicting someone in a very prestigious position. And then the image on the right has depictions of scribes working in some type of workshop. And so you can see the standing figure, he's handing out these papyrus items, and the individuals are working. I'm not sure if they would have always been in these large groups like this, or working more individually on their own. Just to give you that context. And again, this is painted limestone, and this statue was going to be put inside a tomb. And again, to me, it's really amazing just because it's so lifelike. So he's seated, he has his legs crossed, he's wearing a white kilt. Of course, it's very warm in Egypt, so he doesn't need a coat. And he's holding his papyrus. Now, he's missing the reed brush he would have been holding. So picture him holding a brush. Vertically, but at some point in time that was lost, unfortunately, and they haven't recreated to include it in the sculpture. They just leave it as is. And he has a really striking face, so you should like pay attention to that. I'll give you a close-up of the face and the head in just a moment. And one reason why it looks so lifelike is because of the eyes, and they're inlaid with rock crystal and copper clips, which we'll see more in just a moment. So here's a different view. Here's the side view. And again, really great condition when you consider how old this is. And the colors have been maintained. Now, of course, they've done some restoration work and preservation work over the years. It's a view from the back. And the front and the side view.
Robert, we've had a couple of questions on these scribe things. One is because it brings up an opportunity to emphasize another point. The second one, the one that's like 1,000 years more recent, somebody wanted to know what the material was, but I also like to emphasize that that is 1,000 years. We tend to, in our minds, lump things together a little more than, because 1,000 years is a long time. Am I correct, or isn't that much distance between these two figures, right?
Oh, yeah, it is quite a big time frame. It's because they were so important during the whole entire history and culture that, yeah, I mean, this was like a common, not a common, but like an important position during the ancient Egypt culture. So, yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon for the different ones that you'll see in museums to have widely different dates. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, they only did scribe stuff for 100 years of their empire and then stopped.
Yeah, the style is very different between the two of them. But somebody did want to know if you knew what the material was on the blacker one.
Oh, it's a stone. I forget the exact type of stone. But
Okay.
yeah, these are all stone. They're not like plaster or wood, or anything like that. You can see this one has a chip in the hand. So look at the hand, and then even the fingernails have all this detail. And then again, he would have been holding the writing instrument right here, but that's been lost, unfortunately. And then here it is on display. It's very fragile and important, so they have to keep it enclosed in a glass case. Of course, it has all these different technology things that keep the temperature and the humidity and all that kind of stuff at a very specific level. All right, so then here's the close up of his head. And again, the eyes themselves are made out of rock crystals. And then this outer period is copper. And when you zoom in on it, and again, this expressive face that he has and how lifelike it is, really incredible artwork. And then the hair, even, and the lips, and the nose, and the ears, and et cetera, just really incredible. And yeah, here's another zoom in on the face. He's got a little bit of a, he's got the Mona Lisa smile, I think. And so again, this is copper, and then these are rock crystals, and just incredible artwork that they could make this look so lifelike. And we're going to see another work from ancient Mesopotamia from kind of around the same time frame where they did something very similar with the eyes. To keep on the lookout for that. And then there you go. And yeah, wow, look at that.
Almost looks
Very,
like cat's eyes marbles from
oh yeah.
my youth.
Uh-huh.
That's a very good treatment of the eyes. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing, really incredible. All right, let's continue on. And so these are figures of people boating, not pleasure boating, so to speak, like you might be thinking of today. And this is a boat model from around 2000 BC, thereabouts. It was painted wood. We'll talk about the importance that the Nile River played in ancient Egypt in just a moment. Here's a close-up of that. So these are figures on a wooden boat. And again, this is another item that was found in a tomb. All right, so let's talk about the Nile River. Most people probably heard of that. It's 4,000 miles or 6,800 kilometers long. The source is down in Kenya, and it's a little bit different in terms of rivers because it travels, the flow of the water is from south to north, and it enters into the, or exits into the Mediterranean Sea. It's really important in Egyptian life because the Nile was used for food production and trade and transportation, et cetera, et cetera. And then you may think of Egypt as like, you know, desert and sand and stuff, which it does have a lot of spaces like that. But along the Nile River, throughout history, it's been very fertile. So people could live along here, they could develop agriculture, sustain themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And then as you look through the map here, you probably have heard of some of these places before, you know, Alexandria, Memphis, Giza, et cetera, et cetera, Valley of the Kings. And then, of course, the Nile River is still important today in Egypt and was also important during the ancient Egypt times. And then so because of the importance of it, there's of course there's going to be a lot of depictions of it in their artwork. So here's another boat model. This is from sometime between 1800 BC and 2000 BC. Again, the Nile River culture and the importance of this. And so what's happening here is these figures are probably transporting themselves and different materials to the afterlife. So it's not like they're out on a pleasure cruise or anything like that. And again, great artwork depiction of the figures. All right, so we have a lot of folks joining us from New York City, the Big Apple. Welcome, thanks for being here. If you are in New York or if you've visited there, you might have been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and seen their hippopotamus known as William. It's one of the more beloved figures in the Met collection. And so this is a figurine or a statuette that's from the ancient Egypt period. And it's from 1961, not AD, but 1961 BC, or between there and 1878. And the Louvre also has a hippopotamus figurine or statuette, and it's kind of from around the same time frame thereabout. It's glazed ceramic. It's not really large. It's not as large. It's not a life-size depiction of a hippopotamus. We'll talk about that in just a moment. It's 21 centimeters or 8 inches long. And these were, again, part of the funerary furnishings that were put inside of a tomb when someone important passed away. Interestingly enough, the color, why is it blue? Well, hippopotamus spend a lot of their time in the water, so it makes sense from that regard. And in the Nile, where they would be living and other water places, there's a lot of plants and things like that. And so the artist, who we don't know, unfortunately, has done those types of motifs on the side, which is similar to the one at the Met. So here's the one at the Met. Here's the one at the Louvre. In the full view. And the side view. And I think it's funny because the hippopotamus in these depictions and maybe in people's kind of imagination looks kind of, cute and cuddly and all that kind of stuff, which is actually a departure from reality, which we'll talk about in just a moment. All right, so here's a hippopotamus in real life. These very large, magnificent animals. Here's the hippopotamus at the Louvre, a little bit smaller version. Again, painted blue because of the water, with the plant motifs on the outside, just so you can get kind of a depiction, kind of almost like you're looking through the plants to see the hippopotamus. And also in pretty good shape, considering the age of it. Back view, the top view. And then again, here's the Met one and the Louvre one side by side. So you can see the Met one is a little bit older, but very similar design. Now, the thing that's funny to me is when people visit the museums kind of use this figure in their like marketing materials, and it's a really popular item. And like, oh wow, the hippopotamus, it's so cute and cuddly, especially when it's in this like small statuette or figurine motif. But in reality, hippopotamuses are extremely dangerous and ferocious. You do not want to cross paths with a hippopotamus, especially one that's upset. They can easily kill someone. They're very large. They're very powerful. And so that's why they're depicted in this artwork that's put inside the tombs. It's not because, oh, yeah, the pharaoh or whoever, yeah, they want to have their pet hippopotamus that they can go pet and play fetch with and stuff like that. No, these are dangerous and ferocious. So they're put in there just because they're part of the ecosystem, so to speak. But yeah, the kind of the reality of the hippopotamus is a little bit different than maybe kind of people's perceptions, like say in I don't know Europe or America and things like that. Like okay, here, like oh wow, look, I'd like to go pet the hippopotamus or take a selfie with it. Well, you wouldn't if it looked like this, if it was. Um, in its natural state, so to speak. So kind of an interesting way that the animal's personality has been tamed, so to speak. But yeah, this is really popular. So this is at the Louvre. This is one of their cafes. You can go here and get your picture taken. And yeah, aren't they cute and cuddly? All right, let's continue on. So this is a tomb painting. Hold on for just 1 second while I fix up my computer. Bear with me for one moment. Okay, so this is the tomb painting. And again, look at how old this is. Hate to keep harping on the same point, but yeah, I mean, 1500s, 1400s, 1300 BC, sometimes thereabout. Again, playing on the significance of agriculture in Egyptian art, you see that over and over again, time and time again. And again, then tomb. This one was actually on the tomb of an important scribe. So it wasn't just say the royals, so to speak, that were being entombed. Oftentimes, prominent people would be entombed as well, and that was the case. This was a scribe. And another thing that they did, the scribes, is they would inventory the grain supply, which is really important because people need the grain to live, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what's being depicted here. So this particular scribe, this was probably one of his jobs, so to speak, was to inventory the grain because it's being depicted here in this tomb that he had. And again, great detail, very lifelike, etc., etc. Oh, hold on one second. Hold on, I have to tweak something on my computer. I'm going to leave this up for a second. All right. So again, the importance of agriculture and farming. I think now in modern times, we just take agriculture and farming for granted because you can just go down to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or HEB or wherever, pick up your groceries, take them home, eat them, go about your way, or you can go to a restaurant, et cetera, et cetera. So it's easy in current times to kind of forget the importance of agriculture, and particularly in a society like this, because if things didn't work out, if they didn't have a good harvest, so to speak, people would starve to death. And so agriculture really kind of an important means of life and death during all times, but even more so back then. There wasn't kind of the safety net that they have now, and they didn't have the convenience of being able to go to um, Whole Foods and restaurants and things like that. And so you see agriculture being depicted in artwork over and over again during this time, which you don't really see that in recent times. I mean, honestly, what's the most recent depiction of agriculture in art that you can think of? Well, let's see. You have Andy Warhol, no. Margaret Bourke-White, no. Jackson Pollock, no. Et cetera, et cetera. All right. The civilization of ancient Egypt was indebted to the Nile River and its dependable seasonal flooding. The river's predictability and fertile soil allowed the Egyptians to build an empire on the basis of great agricultural wealth. So, this wealth that came from agriculture was able to sustain their society and the people, and they live longer and they have kids and grandkids. And so agriculture is one of the main reasons, not the only reason, but one of the main reasons why Egyptian culture was so important and lasted for such a long time, because they had this agricultural base that not every other culture through history has had. Egyptians are credited as being one of the first groups of people to practice organized agriculture on a large scale. What they mean by that is instead of just some random farmer guy or farmer family doing their own thing, the Egyptian agriculture was much more organized, and because of that, it was much more efficient and organized, and they were able to bring in a larger yield of food, which of course is beneficial to the people and the society. The farming practices allowed them to grow staple food crops, especially grains such as wheat and barley, and industrial crops such as flax and papyrus. And again, there's that depiction. And so again, this was the tomb of a scribe, and it's thought that perhaps he was involved in the grain inventory to some degree, because there's these artworks that were inside of his tomb. There's the full view. And a close up, and again, look at that incredible detail. Of course, it's very hot in Egypt, so the limited amount of clothing that's needed. And close up at the bottom. And the full view. All right, so most people, I would think 99.9% of the people, have heard of King Tut. And again, including some Egyptian artworks that's not at the Louvre, just so you can kind of see the evolving development, transformation that takes place over time. So King Tut, this was his mask. It's at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. King Tut was alive from approximately 1341 BC to 1323. And they just recently, a couple years ago, celebrated the 100th anniversary of the discovery of King Tut's tomb by Howard Carter. And there's the front and the back. And then this is from this throne. So King Tut had this really cool golden throne, and this is one of the more like well-known aspects of his throne. And again, just to give you that context of how all these things kind of fit in with one another from a time frame standpoint. And then we have a lot of friends joining us from London. Welcome. Thanks for being here. At the British Museum, they have one of the most famous Egyptian artworks. And this is a big sculpture from 1270 BC. So, again, going through these artworks both at the Louvre and other places in mostly chronological order, just so you can see how things develop and evolve and change over time. And then this is one of my favorites, really spectacular. Do you recognize this, or do you know the name of this? And it's the Temple of Ramses at Aswan, Egypt. And this was created between 1264 and 1244 BC. It was relocated, though, in 1968 because they were building a dam and they were going to be flooding the area where it was originally placed at, and it would have flooded it and it would have been underwater. So they didn't want that. So they had this massive project to relocate this. That if you want to learn about something really fascinating, you can study this. We don't have time to get into all the details here because we're focused on the Louvre. But yeah, when they built the dam, and they moved the Temple of Ramses a pretty significant distance to get it out of the way of the flooding water. Really incredible feature technology standpoint that point in time. There's the full view. And if you're wondering where this is at, so here's the map of Egypt, here's the Mediterranean, here's Cairo, and this is down here. So if you want to visit this, you can do so. You just have to go quite a ways from Cairo down to southern Egypt to visit it. And then, so it's been damaged over the course of time, but they believe this is what it would look like when it was first created and for the years shortly thereafter. And yeah, I mean, wow, look at how amazing this is. And then look at the steps so you can get the scale of this. So, number one, imagine the technology and the workload that would have been required to create something like this. And number two, look at how massive it is. So, I mean, imagine looking at this in person back in the day. I mean, it's impressive to see now, but much more so back then, especially in an era, of course, before television and photography and the internet and all that kind of stuff. And here's someone checking it out today. So, a popular tourist destination in Egypt. And then here is another famous Egyptian artwork. This is in Luxor. This is a temple from 1350 BC. Again, unfortunately, this has also been damaged over the course of time. But that being said, they still have quite a bit of it to see. So on your next trip to Egypt, make sure you include those two sites. Don't just go to Cairo. All right, this is another one of the more popular Egyptian artworks at the Louvre, and it's the royal couple, and it's from 1353 to 1332, Akhenaten and Nefertiti. This is made out of limestone, which I forgot to mention. Someone pointed out earlier, which I appreciate. Limestone is pretty soft in terms of stone, and so on the one hand, it's easy for artists to use because they can carve in it pretty easily, or easier than in some other stones. The downside is because it is a little bit of a softer stone, it tends to get damaged. And so this particular object, well, it's in great shape. It's also had some damage over the course of time. Again, limestone is 22 centimeters or 9 inches tall. This is the royal couple. And here's a close-up. I really like how they're hand in hand. That's a nice touch, in my opinion, very romantic. Egyptians were, at least in this particular item. I would say, in my opinion, Nefertiti is the more well-known of the royal couples. Her husband, the pharaoh, also an important figure. But I think just people are kind of more intrigued by her, although both of them play a really important role. You can see they actually had a pretty short reign. That being said, And if we had a longer time frame, I would really get into more of like the history of these people and why they were important and all that kind of stuff. But we're really focusing on the art depictions of them. So I try and give a few details here and there, but yeah, it would be great to at some point in time just do a more of a historical type program where we're really just focusing on the artwork per se and the depictions of the people and the places and the things like that. So we'll kind of have to skip over some of the details, especially since we're also talking about Mesopotamia. So we can't spend all morning just on Egyptian stuff, unfortunately. And again, look at the great details with the toenails and the sandals. And again, I really like the fact that they're holding hands. Nice touch. There you have it. And the side view and the full view. Some of the colors are different because the photos were taken at different times under different, say, lighting conditions. So if you're wondering why some of the photos, the colors are, say, lighter or darker, a little bit richer, a little more faded, that's why. All right. And speaking of Nefertiti, this is one of the most famous Egyptian artworks in history, and it's at the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. I see this over and over again in different media contexts. And so this is the bust of Nefertiti. It's from 1345 BC or thereabouts. Nefertiti lived between 1370 and 1330 BC, thereabouts. So she lived for about 40 years. And this is a really stunning thing to see in person. So next time you're in Berlin, you can go check that out. And then here is a view from a different angle. And again, the only reason why the colors are different is because the photographs were taken at different times under different lighting conditions. But I wanted to give you the view from both angles. So again, this is one of the more famous works. It's not at the Louvre, but I just wanted to include it just so you can kind of see how these fit into the big picture, so to speak. Oh, Chris says she does not look happy to me. Yeah, I think so. Through most of history up until recent times, people looked very serious. It was, you're not going to smile and laugh when you're getting your depiction being shown in art. Although she looks a little, she does to me. I wouldn't say she has a frown or a smile, but on the left side, her lips maybe don't look as unhappy. She looks a lot more serious on the right side to me than on the left side. I don't know, Brad and Patty, what you think, but yeah, it's kind of interesting how you can look at art from different angles and see different things. But yeah, Nefertiti, was she happy or in a good mood? Well, we don't know for sure, but usually artwork before the past, say, like 100 years, usually not depicting people smiling and laughing on a consistent basis. All right, this is another one of my favorite works at the Louvre. And this is also by an unknown Egyptian artist. And this is the head of a princess. It was from sometime between 1352 and 1333 BC. Someone might be asking, how do they know how to date this stuff? Well, it's really complicated. They try and find artworks that are similar, and then they look at how things change or evolve over time. It might be similar for your own self. Suppose you find a picture of your kids. Oh, well, in this photo, the kids look smaller than they do in this other photo that I have, which I do know the date on, so I can date it that way. And archaeologists and art historians do the same type of thing. And so that's what's taking place here. So that's why some of these ones, they don't know the exact date because the artist isn't maybe indicating a specific date, but they can judge it based on other things that they are more familiar with. This is the daughter of the couple that we just saw. This is also made out of limestone. It's 16 centimeters high or 6 inches. So it's not a really large object, but I really find it amazing just because it's so lifelike, just like the seated scribe we saw earlier.
I had a question, Robert, about carbon dating. And the point is, these are carved out of stone, so carbon dating wouldn't tell you much of anything.
Hmm. Yeah, because the rock is going to be, from the beginning of time. That's a great point, Patty. Thanks for mentioning that.
The other point, though, is don't they sometimes, with some works of art, aren't they able to tell things by testing the paint if there's any paint chips they can
Oh
take?
yeah, yeah. You probably could do carbon dating on something like that, but then you have to be very careful because you have to actually take the paint off the object,
Okay.
and sometimes they don't want to do that, even if it's a real tiny amount. So yeah, good question on the carbon dating. So yeah, this is the daughter of Nefertiti. So here's the two of them side by side, which is another reason why I wanted to show you the sculpture earlier. So this is at the museum in Berlin, the Egyptian Museum, and of course she's at the Louvre. And again, look at how incredibly lifelike these sculptures are. Really talented in terms of the artistry here. And a front and a side view. I mean, everything from the lips to the eyes, just really incredibly detailed. And you have to figure these are being handmade. This is before machines and all that kind of stuff. Now, in ancient times, she would have had coloring on her face. It's in the torso, and her hair and things like that, but it's mostly been faded. Sometimes in artwork, they decide to recreate something and they'll put the paint on it. Usually, though, it's less significant work. Like usually, they're just going to do touch-ups and things like that. This one has lost a lot of the coloring, and yeah, they could put it back on, but it would be so kind of intrusive that it's lost so much painting. They really don't want to do that, so just kind of leave it the way it is. But if you could picture it being fully colored, it would be even more lifelike. And of course, it has a little bit of damage, but you can see some of the color here. And then you can see some here on the neck, and then of course with the top part, and then here's that eyes with the copper and the crystals. And then so this is a popular artwork, and so you can Google it or find it in different contexts on the internet. So I stumbled across this was someone that was selling a version on Etsy, which does kind of give you a hint of what it would have looked like, a more kind of lifelike with the colors and things filled in and the eyebrows. So if you're looking for a Christmas gift, you can check that out. And then this was interesting. This was someone that made a photograph of what they think the person looked like in real life. So I thought I would include that. It's like interesting kind of compare and contrast between the sculpture. So this is not a real person. This was an AI generated image of someone. But the person who made this photograph, this is their depiction of what they think she looked like in real life or thereabouts. So what do you think, Patty and Brad? Good depiction? SD, AI?
I kind of like the SD better, but it's true to life as far as art looked like.
Mm.
The AI photo reminds me of something years ago in Time magazine, when it was still a pretty good magazine. They had done composite pictures. They were predicting that people would become much more mixed and less segregated. And they did like pictures of what various racial mixtures would look like. And they were really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this AI image here reminds me of, is that imagining of something, and it's so removed some of the uh, conditioned reactions we have.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm
Oh yeah,
saying
yeah.
here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And several people are pointing out that I believe it's supposed to be ETSY as opposed to ESTY, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
And here's kind of a view from the bottom, looking up. This is also in a glass case. Not all the objects are, but several of them are, just because they're very fragile and important. And then also, too, there's just a lot of crazy people out there these days. All right, let's continue on. Here is a statue. This also has some damage to it, unfortunately. This is a type of rock, diorite, and you can see the size of it. It's 85 inches tall, or 215 centimeters. And so what's happening here is this is actually King Tut here. Now, unfortunately, he's lost his head through some type of damage that took place. And then this is the god here that's seated behind him. So it's kind of like a dual portrait, so to speak, of the two of them. The god is seated, King Tut is standing here, and then King Tut's lost his head, unfortunately, at some point in time.
So I think this might be the same era as the later scribe, and looks like similar material, although I don't know for sure. But so diorite might be a possibility. This is much harder, harder
Oh,
stone.
yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting how dark it is.
Yes.
And a close-up.
I wonder if part of that had to do with the development of tools that you could actually carve a harder rock like this with.
Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, you might be right because as technology advances, they have more things at their disposal. Here's the back view. And again, really just kind of showing you a fraction of the collection. I mean, you could spend hours at the Louvre looking through here. Again, they have over 6,000 Egyptian objects in their collection. We're just doing a few highlights. And then, of course, a little bit later, we'll be talking about art from ancient Mesopotamia as well. And again, very lifelike and realistic. And wow, look at that. Staring you right in the face. And again, most of these artworks are funerary arts, meaning that they're used to put in funeral type activities, particularly in tombs for important, prominent people. All right. I think when people think of Egypt, they oftentimes think of mummies, and they have a mummy at the Louvre. Well, they actually have a few. Again, we don't know who the artist was for this. This is an outer coffin from around 1295 to 1069 BC. And this was not a person of, say, a royal stature, but a singer. So earlier we saw that there was a tomb of a scribe. We looked at an artwork from there. And I think when most people think of ancient Egypt and they think of this artwork and the tombs and stuff, oh, okay, it's like King Tut, it's someone that was in charge. Well, not necessarily. They could have other prominent people. And so this was a singer. She must have been someone of importance. Another interesting aspect of ancient Egypt is there's some things that we know a lot about, and some others not really all that much. And so we have a really limited amount of information, unfortunately, on this particular woman, other than the fact that we know she was a singer, and she would probably be performing at different official ceremonies and events and things like that. The coffin itself is made out of wood. It's 75 inches tall or long, depending on how it's set up, or 192 centimeters. And so in ancient Egypt, like in most cultures, music plays a very important role in society, particularly in religious ceremonies. So if there was ever any important religious activity that was taking place, then as in now or other cultures throughout history and throughout the world, music was often a key part of that. And this woman being a singer, she must have been very prominent in that role. So I don't know, she might have been like the Taylor Swift of ancient Egypt. We don't know for sure, don't know all the details about her, but really beautiful coffin cover for her. She's got the arms folded, and then this is gilded gold, and then painted materials, wood, then all the details on it, etc., etc. And then
Norman or Noreen has offered, which again, this is just what she's saying. There's evidence that there have been several iterations of civilization that have been wiped out by cataclysmic climate events, but the technologies have been handed down by us survivors. That's a really interesting detail. The precision in stone carvings from an algebraic perspective is not random.
Oh yeah, that is incredible how things get handed down over time. I mean, even like a lot of things from ancient Egypt and Greece and Rome and stuff were lost over the course of time, and then at some point in time rediscovered, and you can find different instances of that. So yeah, that is a really interesting aspect. Thanks, appreciate mentioning that. And then yeah, just look at all the incredible detail on this artwork. Pretty much every single surface space, to some degree or another, is included in the artwork depictions on it. And then here's the view of the other side. And full view. And then I really like this artwork for some reason. It's very striking. And again, I wish we kind of would know more about some of these individual people and kind of like what their stories were. We do to a certain degree, but not always. And so this is a stone carving from limestone. There's that material popping up once again. And this would have been part of a larger pottery piece. So imagine the pottery piece being carved out of the limestone, and then at some point in time it shattered, and this particular fragment of it's been kept at the Louvre.
What are the letters and the insignia at the bottom, Robert?
I'm not sure exactly what that is, to be
It
honest.
just seemed out of place for some reason.
Yeah, I mean that's a modern emblem. That's not something from ancient Egypt, I don't think.
So that would be like some kind of a bookkeeping or.
I have no idea. I really have no idea what that is. Sorry. It just looks like something modern. Doesn't look like it's not written in hieroglyphs, so I'm not sure what that is.
That's why it popped out, because it didn't look like it belonged there.
A lot of times in artwork, not so much now, but back from 100 or 200 years ago, museums and curators and stuff, they'd put emblems on things like, how you'd brand a horse or a cow or something. So if I had to guess, I would say it would be something that the museum probably put on it, but it's not original to the artwork, probably. It doesn't look Egyptian in any way, so that's why I didn't focus on it. But yeah, I love the eyes with this one, or the eye, I should say, because I only can see one of them. But yeah, great profile view of the figure. And then here's another one. Unfortunately, we don't know the artist for. This is a depiction of a goddess. Some of these we'll have to kind of skip over at kind of a faster pace just because there's only so much time to talk about each particular one. Look at this one, the luster of the gold on this sculpture. So there's three figures. It's a combination of gold and then the blue material. The blue color is lapis. And this is a pretty small object. It's only 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters tall. But this is the family of the god Orsis. And just incredible color, the vibrancy of the gold combined with the lapis blue stonework. And the front and the back view. Someone asked about sacred geometry. I'm actually not familiar with that topic, unfortunately. Sorry. But I would imagine if it has something to do with ancient Egypt or Egyptology, it's incorporated in the Louvre collection just because they're really so well known for their collection there. All right, so here's a figure in making an offering to a big giant falcon. So this is a unusual artwork. This one has a variety of materials made out of wood, bronze, silver, and gold. It's 8 inches high or 20 centimeters high, and so he's making an offering to this falcon god, and the falcon seems to be trying to decide if it's going to accept the offering or not. And again, part of the religious artwork. So we haven't really seen artwork that, oh yeah, some guy wanted a portrait of his wife, or something like that, or oh, someone was just making some random landscape, painting of some view of the Nile River. These all have like specific meanings and purposes, and usually like in the funerary context, or even used in a tomb per se. And one reason why that is because a lot of artwork that wasn't included in protected inside of a tomb would have been lost or destroyed or damaged over the course of time. So, in addition to a lot of the society and the aesthetic functions being geared towards these tombs on the one hand. On the other hand, it's just more easily protected over the course of time, especially when you're talking about something that lasted thousands of years. Here's a view from the other side. All right, continuing on. Here's another statue. This one's in bronze. A little bit different, 21 inches tall. And again, great details on the face. And then look at the details on the wrap around her chest. You kind of see this intricate design features over and over again, which not all that common throughout the history of art. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. But I'm reading about early American art from like the 1700s, and the artists weren't as sophisticated at that point in time in that part of the world as they were here in ancient Egypt. So you wouldn't have seen something so detailed like this in colonial American art. Say, just to give you kind of a comparison and contrast, if you kind of on the top looking down. And then the seven wonders of the world are very well known. And this particular one in Egypt, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, which is no longer standing, unfortunately, was or is one of the seven wonders of the world. And it was made between 284 and 246 BC. And look at how spectacular that is. And then one reason why Egyptian history and culture and artwork, people have learned about it is because of hieroglyphs. We talked before about scribes writing things down and documenting what's going on. For the longest time, historians and archaeologists and things like that, they couldn't decipher hieroglyphs because they couldn't figure it out on their own. They didn't have anything to compare it to. And then lo and behold, the Rosetta Stone was discovered. And the reason why this was an important part of history is because it was carved in 196 BC, but it had three different languages, one of them being Egyptian hieroglyphs and the other one being ancient Greek. Well, they knew ancient Greek. And so once they had that, they were then able to turn and translate the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs because they could just compare it to the Greek and go kind of side by side, so to speak. So this was like a real defining moment in the understanding of Egyptian history when the Rosetta Stone was discovered. Of course, this is at the British Museum in London. And the stone is actually a fragment of what the full thing would have looked like. So this is what they believe the Rosetta Stone would have looked like in full. And then this is the section that still remains. And again, it has this text in different languages, two of them being ancient Egyptian and ancient Greek. And then, of course, Elizabeth Taylor from the 1963 film Cleopatra. Cleopatra, perhaps the most famous person from ancient Egypt. She didn't live a long life. She was born in 69 BC or 69 BCE, and she passed away in 30 BC or BCE. So to give you that context. And so remember, we were talking before about things from, 1000 BC and 2600 BC. And so her lifespan was well after all of those things. And then cats play an important part in Egyptian art. So let's talk about this. This is the goddess cat Basset. So this is a little bit different time frame. This is from the 600 BCs. And this is 11 inches tall. So people really worship the cats there. They played an important part of society. People often had their cats wearing jewels, which I don't know if anyone does that as much now. And they were also fed very fine foods. So cats play an important role in that. Let's talk about that. Cats were represented in social and religious practices of ancient Egypt for over 3,000 years. Several ancient Egyptian deities were depicted and sculpted with cat-like heads. Egyptians believed cats were magical creatures capable of bringing good luck to people that cared for them. Cats were also praised for killing venomous snakes and protecting the home. To honor these treasured pets, wealthy families dressed them in jewels and fed them fine foods. When the cats died, they were often mummified. So there you have it. And this was Basset, the cat goddess, and this particular deity played an important role in fertility and then also the protection of the home. And then you'll see these cat figures or similar ones at museums throughout the world. So again, for our friends in New York that are familiar with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they have a similar cat statuette from sometime in the early BC days, or I should say the late BC days, sorry. And then here's the one that's at the Louvre, and again, very lifelike and detailed.
Noreen's making another observation. She says the interesting carving features that are found in Egypt are similarly found on statues in Asia, South America, and India, and the commonalities are intriguing, which they are all Southern Hemisphere, which would be a connection we have tended historically to overlook.
Oh yeah, no, definitely overlooked a lot. And then remember back to the Seated Scribe, here's kind of that similar technique with the rock crystal eyes and the copper around the perimeter to keep the crystals in place. And looking very lifelike. And then here's perhaps the most important quote of the whole entire program. Cats used to be worshipped in ancient Egypt, and they've never forgotten that. So there you have it. If anyone's a cat owner, you can appreciate that. Again, close up of the side view, the front view.
The more modern expression of that is dogs have masters, cats have staff.
Oh, I hadn't heard that before. I like that. That's really good.
But it makes sense.
Dogs have cats. That's good, Brad. Thanks. I hadn't heard that one. Appreciate that. So yeah, you see the figure of the cat over and over again, and even at the Louvre, they have a number of different cat depictions. I liked this one a lot, and this is probably the most famous one. So I thought I would just include this one and pass over some of the other ones. And then also in New York City, they have this structure, which is one of their most well-known artworks. So this was a temple that was relocated to New York. This kind of a long, fascinating history as well, the relocation of this. But if you go to the Met, this is really striking. I mean, the picture, you can see the size of it. Yeah, it's really large, but to go see this in person is really amazing. The first time I visited the Met and I saw it, I was like, wow. I was looking at this, just had to stop and take it all in for quite a few minutes. Just really, really spectacular. So again, just including a few additional works, so you can get kind of a sense of how things fit in. Here's the full view, and you can kind of walk around and check it out. Here's the front view. All right, so that's ancient Egypt, but I also wanted to talk about the art of ancient Mesopotamia because it's kind of from around the same time frame. And if you're, say, outside the Middle East, Mesopotamia isn't too far away from ancient Egypt. And Mesopotamia plays a really important role in history. It's known as the cradle of civilization. So we're going to transition from ancient Egypt over to ancient Mesopotamia. Let's check out some of the things there. I love this artwork. We'll talk about it in detail in just a moment. So ancient Mesopotamia, it's known as the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization. They also played a really important role in developing agriculture and farming. They had important large cities and they were writing, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a statue of a prominent figure, and it's made out of alabaster. It's 21 inches tall. So this gentleman was an important administrator in the city that he was residing in. He's got this really fascinating praying posture with his hands clasped, and then he's wearing a ceremonial skirt. And then the eyes and the face, very lifelike and detailed. And then this has been called a masterpiece by virtue of its craftsmanship, state of preservation, and expressive style. All right, so where is this from? So, okay, so here is Egypt over here, and this particular spot that we're talking about is right here, Mari. And this was a important city-state. This is a depiction of what they think it looked like. This was not a aerial photo taken from a drone or anything like that. It was a recreation of what they think the city looked like. It had walls to kind of keep the bad people out, so to speak. And so this gentleman that was depicted in the sculpture was the like administrator, kind of sort of maybe like the mayor of this particular area. And there's other kind of similar figures in museums throughout the world, again, going back to the Met, because they have some really fabulous collection of Egyptian artwork as well. So here's kind of a similar figure with the hands clasped. Now, this is from the one at the Met is from Iraq, and it's from around 2600 to 29 BC. The one at the Louvre is from Syria, and it's from 2400 BC. So this one was a later one. This one was a more recent one by a few hundred years, between 200 and 500 years. And it was discovered during an archaeological dig. It was actually in pieces. So here's a archaeologist discovering the head, and they were photographing this dig. So when they uncovered something, they started taking pictures of it. And so, yeah, the head had been knocked off from the body, so they had to reattach it. So they used super glue or duct tape or something like. No, I'm just kidding. They a little more advanced than that, but yeah, really great. Just the expressive face on this is really incredible. And the that's kind of the diagonal view and the side view or profile view. Now, when this was first created, there would have been jewels in his beard, so that's what these holes are for. So if you could imagine that, it would have been a more, say, elaborate, so to speak, but the jewels have been lost somehow over the course of time. And then there's the hands clasped and that great face, and again, how lifelike it is. And again, you have the kind of the similar thing we've seen before with the Egyptians. We have the rock crystal for the eyes, and then the copper around the outside to keep everything in place. And yeah, look at that great face. So it was funny because we were talking before about Nefertiti and the smile and the lack of smile. Well, this one's interesting because he has a little bit of a happy smile, so to speak. And you can kind of see the similarities and the differences between him and the Seated Scribe from ancient Egypt that we saw earlier. And they're kind of sort of from around the same general time frame, so to speak. And then if you go to the Louvre, you might be walking through the galleries and think, gee, why are all these people standing around looking at this tall thing? What is this? Well, it's actually something important. It's from an unknown Babylonian artist in present day Iraq, and it's the Code of Hammurabi. And this is from 1755 to 1750 BC. This is a rock called basalt. This is a really tall object, as you gathered from the picture that I just showed you a minute ago. It's 88 inches or 224 centimeters tall. And this is where, among other things, that term an eye for an eye came about. That's like a common saying that people use even in today. And this was discovered in 1901 in Iran. And so here's the full view of the object. And Hammurabi was an important leader in the Babylonian Empire. And so this map is showing his realm, so to speak. This is the Euphrates River. And then here he is. So this is from almost 4,000 years ago, Hammurabi. And he was an important figure because he was a great leader. He was a builder of things. He was a great administrator, et cetera, et cetera. And then so the kind of the significance of this was The Code of Hammurabi represents the oldest laws known to mankind, which came from Mesopotamia to protect all layers of Babylonian society, including women and slaves, and aimed to protect the poor from the rich. And the importance of this law, which was written and declared for the people to understand the law that organized their lives, and represents the ideal model of legal means invented by mankind. So this is when they were um, dedicating a sculpture recreation of it at the United Nations in New York City. So that's where this photo was taken. This is not the original. This is a reproduction, but they wanted this on hand at the United Nations because of kind of the importance of law and legality in society. And this Code of Hammurabi was like the first time in Western civilization that this had been documented, at least as far as they know. Now, maybe it had been done in previous times and they've been lost, but in terms of ones that we're aware of, this is the oldest known ones. And if you go to the U.S. Capitol in the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., they also have references to this Code of Hammurabi. And so there's the view of the sculpture. Kind of tilts off to one side a little bit because of the formation of the rock. And then as far as the actual code itself, okay, so what exactly is the Code of Hammurabi? So here's a couple examples. And again, it's this eye for an eye is the most famous like quote from it. But in summary, if a builder constructs a house for a man, but makes it so that a wall then buckles, that builder shall make the wall sound using his own silver. Another example or quote from the code is, if a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. If a man breaks the tooth of another man, one of his teeth shall be broken. Thus, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So that's where that comes from. And so that's why this is so important, because it really kind of lays the foundation of a lot of like modern Western legality and administrative and things like that, which might not seem like a big deal now, but this is the oldest known version of this type of thinking that we have in the Western world. And this is depicting the sun god on the right, and Hammurabi on the left is paying him a visit to get all this knowledge and wisdom and things like that. And then this is an interesting part of the museum. Speaking of ancient Mesopotamia, this is a popular like photo spot, so to speak. And this is from the Assyrian Empire, which is present day Iraq, from 721 to 705 BC. This is gypsum alabaster, and this is over 13 feet tall. This figure, or these figures, I should say, was a man, a bull, and an eagle, all combined into one. So the head of a man, the body of a bull, and the wings of an eagle. So it's kind of like taking the best parts of these three figures, putting them all together. And this is called Lamassu sculptures. You can see these at different museums throughout the world. It's a crowned head of a man, the body of a, so kind of like the intelligence of the man, the body of the bull for the strength, and then the wings of an eagle for the ability to fly. And so these sculptures were used kind of both as like a show of strength and to keep away like evil spirits and things like that. And then also they served a decorative feature as well. This also would have been painted at some point in time. The paints faded over the course of history, but imagine how spectacular it would have looked when it was covered with the painted material as depicted on the right. And then to give you an indication of the size, so again, these are going to protect tombs. So in a lot of societies, there's a big belief around the importance of protecting things from evil spirits and things like that. And so that's what's taking place here. These would have been these fierce, powerful figures. And so someone was to come up here, well, the thought is it would scare them away, so to speak. So this is protecting the gates of the city.
Interesting cultural observation is, there are multiple examples of man and animal being melded as a cultural representation of, as you say, strength. And now we are so fascinated culturally with this AI and this, you see all the time robotics being depicted in one way or another. So it's interesting. This culture really referenced itself and placed itself in the natural world, whereas we've come to this point where we sort of imagine culture and art being beyond, created by man, but beyond man.
Oh yeah. No, definitely in that regard. There was a few people commenting in the chat about the Code of Hammurabi, if it was in Iraq or Iran. It's actually tied to both places. So it was initially created in Iraq, but at some point in time during its life, it was transported to Iran, and that's where it was found. So that's why there's the confusion. The Code of Hammurabi, was it from Iraq or was it from Iran? The modern countries, and yeah, it was made in Iraq, but when they discovered it, it was in Iran. So at some point in time, it had been transported there. So that's the story with that. Let's see. Okay, so we're talking about the Neo-Assyrian Empire, 911 to 609 BC. This is actually an empire that's referenced in the Bible. And here's this palace. It's in present-day Iraq. And then this was in the news because when ISIS was attacking places and people and things, they ransacked or they destroyed a lot of these sites, unfortunately. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad has been able to kind of restore some of these objects and put them on display. And again, at the Met in New York, they also have a set of these, which you may have seen, or if you're not able to go to the Louvre and you're in America, maybe you can just make it to the Met and see some similar things. And again, here's the picture at the Louvre. Here's a view from the other side. And the scale of these is really amazing. So that's one of the great things about the Louvre. They have artwork and like architectural objects from all over the world throughout history. And one minute you could be looking at the Mona Lisa, and then a short time later you could be walking over here checking this stuff out. So really incredible. It gives you a chance to kind of journey through the whole entire world through time. This is a popular like selfie or photo spot just because of the scale of these and how unusual they are in terms of like comparisons with say European art or American art. And again, this is before machines, so this all would have been carved from stone by hand, which obviously would have been a very labor intensive process. And then there's these relief sculptures. So relief sculpture is when the sculpture is not three-dimensional or like a 360-degree view. It's more of like a panel like these. And so again, this was the head of a man, the body of a bull for its strength, and then the wings of an eagle, so the ability to fly. And so all three of these kind of attributes into one figure. And then here's another figure over here, and he's wrestling with a lion. So this is from the same location, the Palace of Sargon II. This is also gypsum alabaster. It's what's called a monolithic sculpture. What that means, it's a sculpture that's all from the same material. Mono means one. So monolithic. This is over 18 feet tall. So again, the size and the scale of these really incredible. And so this is a mythological hero from their culture. And what he's doing is he's wrestling a lion. You figure, oh, lion's really, ferocious and strong and stuff. But he's not having any problems with the lion because he's so strong and powerful himself. And so the depiction here is that, this lion is rendered helpless by this mythological hero. And again, look at the scale of it compared to a person. Here's a close-up of his face. He doesn't even seem concerned about the fact that he has this lion in only one of his arms, which he's subdued. The lion doesn't look too happy about this situation, but that's the way it goes. And in the side-by-side view. And then we were talking before about the seven wonders of the world. Another one of those was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which would have been in present-day Iraq from around 500 BC. This is one of the more, say, mysterious seven wonders of the world. They're not quite sure all the aspects and details of this. Here's an artist's recreation of what it would have looked like. So yeah, imagine how spectacular it would have been to see that. Thus, it was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Here's another artist depiction of what it might have looked like. And the reason why I bring that up is because the gate at Ishtar was from this same area and same kind of general time frame, so to speak. This is glass ceramics. You see these in a lot of different museums throughout the world as well. This is a wall panel. It's depicting a lion. Here's the close-up. And so during that same time frame, there was this really important, prominent, well-known structure called the Ishtar Gate. So this is protecting their city. When people would visit, they would have to come in through this main entrance. And then, of course, the walls are kind of protecting the city. So this is the Ishtar Gate. And the lion that we just saw is one of these side panels over here. And so the gate is actually been was taken down and set up in Germany, which is a little bit controversial because the appropriations of some of these things, but that's like a topic for another day. And the panels that we're looking at though are from the side here. So here's the panel. Here's the artist's recreation of what the gate would have looked like in ancient times. And then here is the gate on display in Berlin. And again, this is from the Babylonian Empire, 575 BC. And this doorway here gives you kind of the scale of it, or this picture does. Or this one. So again, this is not at the Louvre. It's in the museum in Berlin. I'm just showing it to you because the panel that we looked at a moment ago is from this same structure, so to speak. And it's the lion figure made out of these cool colored bricks. Oh, and just to go back again, so as you can see on here, I mean, this wall is really long, so there were dozens and dozens of these, and this happens to be the one that's on display at the Louvre. I used to work at the Detroit Institute of Arts. They have one of these lions in their collection as well, and you can probably see them in other museums. Here's another great artistic depiction. It's kind of more of like an architectural type of element. This is a frieze depicting different individuals.
Noreen she has some wonderful insights here. She said, as you look on the sculptures, always take note of the precision and smoothness and finish. The perfect symmetry has been measured and found to be within hundreds of millimeters deviation. It's impossible to recreate by hand. Some we cannot recreate with our machines today. They had added technology that we don't have now, but she makes it clear she's not implying aliens. The development of previous civilizations were in some areas more skilled evolved than we are now, proven by our scientific testing. I'm fascinated by geological evidence coupled with archaeology and also stories handed down by cultures.
Yeah, again, I mean, this would be amazing to make now if you made it by hand, but even more so back then, they didn't have knowledge of some things that we do. Of course, they had knowledge of things that we don't today, and it's such yeah, the technology and the craftsmanship. That's why one reason people are so intrigued by these objects. I mean, this would be beautiful to make today, even more so back then. So yeah, thanks, appreciate that. That's really cool. So again, this is a frieze. A frieze is like architectural figures where they're usually depicted like a side view. It's a series of components that are put together. So in this particular case, it's this glazed brick and this wall or this frieze wall, 15 feet tall or 4.5 meters. It's polychrome. It's like the official name of the material, but that just means it's painted brick. And this is depicting Darius the Great. It's from his tomb or his palace. Sorry, not his tomb, his palace. And I think maybe people in Europe and America and other parts of the world might not realize the kind of significance of some of these empires from the ancient Mesopotamia world. So, like for instance, we're talking at this point in time about the first Persian Empire, which was from 559 to 330 BC. And at this point in time, it was this largest empire in this particular region. And here is Darius the Great, depiction of what he might have looked like. He's an important figure in history. He was not only a military conqueror, but also an important administrator. And then he was a builder. These things that we've been looking at were built during his reign. And if you've been familiar with history, there's the marathons that they run today. That name comes from the Battle of Marathon from 490 BC, which was the Persians versus the Greeks. And again, we have to kind of skip over some of the historical stuff because we're focusing on art. And here's a depiction of what his palace in present day Iran would have looked like. And then these frieze panels were from that palace, and they've been transported to the Louvre. They've really, I really like the colors of these. They're very kind of, I don't know what the word is, like pleasing or pleasant to look at these. And again, when you go to the Louvre, all these different kind of objects that you can see is really incredible. That's why if you visit the Louvre, if you've never been there before, yeah, you could go for like 2 hours, but even if you were there all day, you're really only going to be able to see a fraction of the stuff. So if you visit, you're really going to have to kind of prioritize what you want to see depending on how much time you have. But there's just so much stuff to see. And so today, I thought I really just kind of want to give you some highlights so that maybe you could learn more about ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. And if you found something that kind of piqued your interest, you can maybe do some additional research on your own or visit the museum by your house, or the next time you're going to be traveling somewhere at such. So here's just some details of these military figures. These are like archers and people carrying different military type objects. And Darius was a military conquest kind of guy. So it makes sense that they would be depicting this in his palace because a lot of his power came from different military conquests that he had had. All right. So, wow, that time went by fast. Let's see. Let me do this. Let me just go over kind of a few closing items, and then I'll check back in with Brad and Patty and see if anybody has any questions or comments in the chat. So this has been the Louvre, Paris. I know this was a high level look, but gee, we've been talking for almost 2 hours. You could probably talk for 2 days on this subject. We were covering ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. This program is actually being recorded. It'll be put on our YouTube channel, which is called Washington, D.C. History and Culture. I'll do that later this weekend, and then I'll send out the link for that. If you want to see other art history programs or just history programs in general, you can check out our YouTube channels. The Washington, D.C. History and Culture one's like our flagship one. And then myself, I live in Texas, and so I set up a second channel that focuses more on like Texas history and culture type things. And then we'll have another part that will be the Louvre, but it'll focus on ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So that'll be sometime probably early next year. Don't have a date for that, but you can be on the lookout for that. And then as far as programs coming up, these are on our Eventbrite calendar. They're not on our meetup calendar, but I'll try and fix that this weekend. So just FYI, next Saturday, a week from today, we're going to be going to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. So kind of a similar program like this, except instead of talking about ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, we're talking about Vincent van Gogh. Then in January, we'll be doing part 2 of our series on Georgia O'Keeffe. Part 1 focused on Georgia O'Keeffe's early years and her paintings. She made the cityscapes of New York City. Part 2, we're going to focus on flower paintings and abstraction paintings from Georgia O'Keeffe. That'll be Saturday, January 4th. And then in January 11th, we'll be going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we'll be looking at the collection of Claude Monet paintings there and talking about Monet's impact on Impressionism. So we don't always use the same Zoom links for our programs, but just to keep things simple, these 3 programs will use the same Zoom link as we use today. And as I mentioned before, these programs are on our Eventbrite calendar. They're not on our meetup calendar just yet, but I'll change that in just a moment. And with that, let me go back and check in with Brad and Patty. Brad and Patty, any kind of final thoughts on ancient Egypt or ancient Mesopotamia or anything else that strikes your fancy?
Well, usually, particularly in this program, so many things come up that make me think, oh, all I need is another 1,000 years and I will understand history better. Um, but Mrs. Miles, I think she goes by, mentioned that if you were interested in pursuing some of this further, you might want to look into the whole concept of sacred geometry,
Oh, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
because that's apparently a factor in a lot of this art. So yeah, so it's one way. There's so many doors and avenues into so much of this stuff. That's what I love about your programs, Robert.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And to continue on her thought, yeah, a lot of societies from the ancient world that were very advanced, whether it was the Egyptians or the Mesopotamians or the Chinese or whoever, but yeah, really good at math, because you would need those measurements and dimensions and all that thing. And, the accounting of the wheat harvest by the scribes and all that stuff. So yeah, really interesting how math plays an important part in a lot of these civilizations throughout time.
And I think I may be wrong because I'm not an expert, but I think the sacred aspect is this idea that some of these mathematical patterns exist in nature. I think Fibonacci sequences, that seems to ring a bell, something like that. That I think that's why they revered and mimicked them or repeated them, because they found them to occur in nature. And as I was saying earlier, clearly their idea of strength and greatness and so many concepts are conveyed through this mixing of animals in the water, in the air, on the land, mixed with human beings. So they had a very clear concept of a place in the world.
Oh yeah, and quite a few people are echoing my thoughts that, gosh, should have paid more attention in school in geometry, among other things. Or maybe I was absent that day when the teacher was talking about that.
I can remember we used to do the Fibonacci equations, but I for some reason, when I was in school, nobody ever really drove home to me that that was the significance of them, is how frequently they appear in nature.
Mhm. Oh yeah, no, very true. What about Brad? Any final thoughts on ancient Egypt or ancient Mesopotamia?
I'm gonna make it quick because I got a barking dog in the background that I can't.
Oh, that's okay.
But I agree
It's
with that.
barking at the cat we looked earlier.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of these things that really come forward to the present day that this program just reinforces. And I agree with Patty on the Fibonacci and how they teach theory in school, but they never always tie them together. And that's sort of a shame that it wasn't done a little better in tying the things that come from nature to what art took. It's really phenomenal. So thank you very much, Robert. This was a great one.
Oh no, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see. Oh, I noticed that on this one the date got dropped off. Sorry about that. So it's Saturday, January 11th. And if you want to know the time, because we have people joining us from all over the world, you should check our site. But I can email these out, the exact date and the times, to people, and I'll do that when I send out the Zoom link. So okay.
Thank you.
Brad and Patty, anything else?
You have a program tonight, right? The Sinatra program?
Yeah, Frank, it's Frank Sinatra's birthday coming up.
Okay.
Go from ancient Egypt to Hoboken, New Jersey, and Las Vegas and Hollywood and various other places.
So many similarities.
So we'll see
Palm
you at
Springs.
8 o'clock then.
Yeah,
8
yeah,
o'clock.
yeah. That's a different Zoom link, everyone. So if you signed up for that, we'll see you then. If you haven't, just go to our meetup or Eventbrite calendar. But we're using the music programs use a different Zoom link. So FYI on that. I don't have it with me at the moment. So sorry about that. Well, all right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I thought what I would do is give you a sneak preview of what we'll be talking about next Saturday. So feel free to join us same time, same place, same Zoom link. And we'll be talking about the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. Special thanks to Brad and Patty. Greatly, greatly appreciate all your help, as always. And thanks to everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend. Stay safe. And we'll see you next time.